In the heart of a burning castle, a princess watched her world turn to ash. She was born to unite a nation, but became a symbol of its most tragic division. Her name was Sen-hime. Her story is not one of distant, dusty history, but a deeply human drama of love, loss, and survival against impossible odds. Her grandfather was Tokugawa Ieyasu, the patient, cunning unifier who would become the first shogun of a dynasty that would rule Japan for over 250 years. He was a master of the long game, a man who saw people not as family, but as pieces on a grand chessboard. Her maternal grandmother was the sister of the fearsome warlord Oda Nobunaga, the fiery visionary who had nearly conquered Japan before his own betrayal. Sen-hime was, in every sense, a thoroughbred of the Sengoku period, the age of warring states, born with the blood of Japan's most powerful and ambitious clans flowing through her veins. This lineage was not a gift, it was a heavy burden, a gilded cage from which she could never escape. This is not a fairy tale of a blessed princess. This is a story of fire and betrayal, of a love so powerful it was said to leave a curse in its wake. It is a story that asks us what it means to have everything and nothing, all at the same time. To truly understand her fate, we must journey back to 1597. Japan was a nation holding its breath, balanced on a knife's edge. The great unifier, Toyotomi Hideyori, a man who had risen from the humblest peasant origins to become the undisputed ruler of the land, was dying. His body was failing, and with it, the fragile peace he had forged. His greatest anxiety, an obsession that consumed his final days, was the future of his clan, which rested entirely on the small shoulders of his only heir, a young boy named Hideyori. With Hideyoshi gone, a power vacuum was inevitable. The powerful lords he had subjugated were like wolves, circling and waiting for the moment to strike, and the most powerful wolf of all was Tokugawa Ieyasu. In a final, desperate gambit to secure his son's future from his deathbed, Hideyoshi orchestrated one last political alliance. He decreed in his will that his 6-year-old son, Hideyori, would be betrothed to Ieyasu's 2-year-old granddaughter, Sen-hime. It was a move of pure political calculus, a common but cruel tool of the era. For the samurai elite, marriage was not about love, it was about power. Sen-hime was not a child. She was a political hostage, a living treaty designed to bind the two most powerful families in Japan together. She was destined to become a human bridge, spanning the treacherous gap between two titans. At the tender age of 7, Sen-hime was sent away from her family in a magnificent procession. Imagine a child, dressed in silks she could barely move in, leaving everything she knew to enter the gilded cage of her family's greatest rival. Her destination was Osaka Castle, the grandest, most impregnable fortress in all of Japan, a city within a city, the heart of Toyotomi power. Yet, by all accounts, her life there was not one of misery. The marriage was political, but the bond that grew between her and her young husband, Hideyori, was said to be genuine and affectionate. They were two children, trapped together by a fate far larger than themselves, finding solace in each other's company. But outside the colossal stone walls and deep, dark moats of Osaka Castle, the world was changing. Her grandfather, Ieyasu, was not a man to be bound by a promise made to a dead rival. He consolidated his power, won the decisive Battle of Sekigahara, and was appointed shogun by the emperor, establishing his own government in the eastern city of Edo. The power of the Tokugawa was now absolute, eclipsing the fading authority of the Toyotomi. The bridge that Sen-hime was meant to be was becoming irrelevant, a relic of a promise no one intended to keep. The two families she was bound to were on an unavoidable collision course. In 1614, using a trivial insult on a temple bell inscription as a pretext, her grandfather declared war on her husband. The siege of Osaka had begun. For Sen-hime, this was not a distant political event. It was a declaration of war on her home, on her husband, on the life she had built. Her heart was a battlefield, torn between the grandfather she was taught to revere and the husband she had come to cherish. The tragedy that followed would define her forever. The year is 1615. The final battle for the soul of Japan has reached its terrifying climax. The siege of Osaka, a brutal campaign that had simmered for months, now exploded into a final, desperate inferno. Osaka Castle, once a shining symbol of absolute power and architectural genius, was now a tomb of fire, smoke, and the screams of the dying. The air was thick with the smell of burning wood and blood. Inside its besieged walls, a 19-year-old Sen-hime was facing the end of her world. The cannons of her grandfather's army thundered, shaking the very foundations of the keep where she and her husband took refuge. Each explosion was a heartbeat of her own family, trying to kill her new one. As the outer defenses fell and flames began to lick at the main tower, her grandfather, Ieyasu, gave a crucial order. While the Toyotomi clan was to be annihilated, his granddaughter was to be saved at all costs. She was too valuable a pawn, a symbol of Tokugawa legitimacy, to be lost in the fire. A rescue mission was launched. Tokugawa samurai, fighting with a desperate ferocity, carved a path through the chaos of the burning castle. They fought through collapsing corridors and smoke-filled chambers, their sole objective to retrieve the shogun's granddaughter from the heart of the inferno. When they finally reached her, she was pulled from the flames, a survivor of a world that was ceasing to exist around her. Every step away from the keep was a step away from the person she had become. Brought before the victorious Ieyasu in his field headquarters, Sen-hime, covered in soot and trembling with shock, made a desperate plea. Forgetting her status as a Tokugawa princess, she fell to her knees and begged him. As a granddaughter to a grandfather, to spare Hideyori and his mother. It was an act of incredible bravery and incredible foolishness. But for Ieyasu, this was not a matter of family. It was the final bloody move in a lifelong chess game for control of a nation. Pity had no place on the board. Absolute victory required absolute annihilation. Her pleas fell on deaf ears. His expression, as recorded by those present, was like stone. He saw not a grieving granddaughter, but a final loose thread in his grand design. Shortly after, a great plume of black smoke erupted from the castle's main keep, visible for miles around. It was the signal. Her husband, Hideyori, and his mother, Yodo-dono, had chosen to die with honor, taking their own lives in ritual suicide as the fiery keep collapsed around them. For the samurai class, this was not an act of surrender, but a final act of defiance, a way to control one's own destiny and deny the enemy the satisfaction of capture. The Toyotomi clan, which had once ruled all of Japan, was extinguished in a single day. And it was Sen-hime's own family that had held the torch. At 19, she was a widow, her life shattered by the very man who was supposed to be her ultimate protector. In the immediate aftermath of this horror, as the ashes of Osaka cooled, Sen-hime made a surprising and courageous move. She learned that Hideyori had fathered a young daughter with one of his concubines. The child's name was Nahime. By all rights, as a scion of the defeated enemy, the child was marked for death or a life of forced servitude in a convent. But Sen-hime, fueled by a potent mixture of grief, guilt, and a deep, abiding love for her late husband, was determined to save this last vestige of his bloodline. She pleaded again, this time not for a rival lord, but for an innocent child. She offered to adopt Nahime as her own daughter, raising her within the protection of the Tokugawa clan. This time, her plea was granted. This single act of compassion reveals the depth of her character. It was a quiet act of defiance, a way of honoring the memory of the family her own had destroyed. But as she began her long journey back to the Tokugawa capital of Edo, with her adopted daughter in tow, a new, entirely unexpected chapter of her life was about to begin. On the road leading away from the ashes of her past, she would meet a man who would make her believe in love again. But could happiness, true and lasting, ever rise from such a tragic, blood-soaked beginning? On her somber journey from the ruins of Osaka, Sen-hime's procession was guarded by a contingent of elite samurai. Among them was their commander, a handsome and noble warrior named Honda Tadatoki. In the midst of her profound grief, an unlikely connection was forged. Perhaps it was his quiet strength, or a shared glance of understanding. A spark of new love ignited in the darkness of her past. Her grandfather, Ieyasu, perhaps feeling a pang of guilt for the immense suffering he had caused her, or perhaps simply seeing another politically useful match, gave his blessing to their union. Sen-hime remarried. Her new life was a world away from the tragedy of Osaka. Her husband's family was granted the domain of Himeji, and her new home became the magnificent Himeji Castle. Known as the White Heron Castle for its stunning white walls and elegant wing-like roofs, it was a fairy tale fortress, a symbol of peace and beauty. To solidify her status and the prestige of the Honda clan, Sen-hime was granted a personal dowry of 100,000 koku, an immense fortune, equivalent to the entire income of a minor lord. This gave her significant political and economic power in her own right. For a time, it seemed the tragedy was finally behind her. She was no longer a pawn of destiny, but the celebrated Princess of Himeji. Her life with Tadatoki was, by all accounts, a period of profound happiness. Theirs was a union of genuine affection, and it was blessed with a daughter, Katsuhime, and later a long-awaited son, Kochio. After years of turmoil, political maneuvering, and devastating loss, Sen-hime finally had what she had always craved: a happy, peaceful family of her own, safe within the walls of her beautiful castle. She had found her safe harbor, but the ghosts of Osaka were not so easily forgotten. The shadow of her past was long, and it was about to fall over her newfound paradise. Tragedy, when it returned, was swift and merciless. Her beloved son, Kochio, the heir to the Honda clan, died suddenly at the age of 3. The joy that had filled Himeji Castle was replaced by a suffocating grief. But the cruelty of fate was not finished with her. Just a few years later, her husband Tadatoki, the great love of her second life, also fell gravely ill and died at the young age of 31. Her world of happiness, so carefully rebuilt, collapsed once more into ruin. In the wake of this second wave of devastation, whispers began to spread through the land. In an age where superstition was deeply woven into the fabric of daily life, such a string of misfortunes could not be mere coincidence. People started talking of a curse, the curse of Hideyori, they called it. It was said that the vengeful spirit of her first husband, unable to rest in peace, was punishing her for finding happiness after his demise. The tragic deaths of her son and second husband were seen as supernatural retribution, haunted by unrelenting grief and now by the weight of public superstition. Sen-hime made a drastic decision. She would leave her worldly life and its unbearable sorrows behind. But as she prepared to retreat from the world, was she running from a curse, or was she finally turning to confront the ghost that had defined her entire existence? After the death of her second husband, Sen-hime left the splendor of Himeji Castle forever. She returned to the Tokugawa capital of Edo, the city her family had built. There, she cut her long black hair, a symbolic act of renouncing the secular world, and became a Buddhist nun. She took the name Tenjuin. Her life of romance, tragedy, and political marriage was over. A new life of piety, reflection, and quiet influence began. Living under the protection of her brother, the third shogun Tokugawa Ieyasu, she was far from a powerless recluse. As the shogun's elder sister and a woman who had witnessed the most pivotal events of the era, she became a respected and influential figure in the uku, the women's quarters of Edo Castle. She was an advisor, a matriarch, and a woman of action. When a domain governed by a relative suffered from a catastrophic flood, she used her unique position to appeal directly to the government, securing 40,000 ryo in relief funds, a massive sum that saved countless lives. She was no longer a victim of politics, but a practitioner of it, wielding her influence for the betterment of others. Her dramatic life, filled with such intense love and loss, inevitably inspired countless legends, plays, and stories. Tales were told of a disfigured samurai who had rescued her from Osaka, who became obsessed with her and tried to kidnap her on her wedding day. Other darker legends painted her as a wicked, depraved woman in her old age. But these are just that, stories. They are fiction, born from a mix of sympathy for the tragic men in her life and a societal inability to comprehend a woman who simply endured so much. The truth is that Sen-hime was a survivor, not a villain. Her life was a testament to resilience, not a cautionary tale of a curse. Her true, tangible legacy was not a curse, but a bloodline. Her daughter with Tadatoki, Katsuhime, ensured that her lineage continued. Through her daughter's marriage, Sen-hime's bloodline wove its way back into the very fabric of the ruling class, eventually even connecting to future Tokugawa shoguns. The human bridge that was so violently burned at Osaka was, in a way, quietly and patiently rebuilt through her children, binding the nation's elite in a new era of peace. Sen-hime, the nun Tenjuin, died peacefully in 1666 at the age of 70. She outlived her grandfather, her husbands, her enemies, and the sensational legends told about her. She was born a pawn in a great game of power, witnessed the complete destruction of one world, and then found and lost a personal paradise in another. Her story forces us to ask, what is the true measure of a life? Is it the grand historical events one is part of, or is it the quiet, unyielding resilience required to survive them? Sen-hime's journey from a burning castle to a peaceful convent teaches us that even in the face of unimaginable loss, a life can be rebuilt, and a legacy can be found not in power or revenge, but in endurance, compassion, and the profound strength it takes to simply keep living.